The wind came from the north like a howling demon, carrying ice and snow that cut through flesh like razors, and Jonas Emmett knew with absolute certainty that if he did not reach his cabin within the hour, the mountain would claim him just as it had claimed so many others before him. He pushed forward through the chest-high drifts, his massive frame bent against the gale, muscles screaming in protest beneath layers of fur and leather. The year was 1878, and winter in the Colorado Rockies showed no mercy to anyone, not even a man who had survived 12 brutal seasons in these unforgiving peaks. Jonas had been checking his trap line when the blizzard swept down from the high country with terrifying speed. He had seen storms before, weathered dozens that would have killed lesser men, but this one possessed a fury that made even his seasoned instincts scream warnings. The temperature had plummeted so fast that his beard had frozen solid within minutes, ice forming on his eyelashes and making each blink a conscious effort. His cabin was still 2 miles distant when the world turned completely white, visibility reduced to nothing more than the vague outline of his own hands. He stumbled forward, relying on memory and instinct, counting his steps and feeling for the landmarks he had memorized years ago. The big boulder shaped like a bear's head, the cluster of 3 pines growing from a single root system, the steep drop where the creek cut through the rocks. Each one confirmed he was still on the right path, still heading toward safety rather than wandering in circles until exhaustion and cold dragged him down forever. When his gloved hand finally struck wood, Jonas nearly wept with relief. The cabin. Home. He fumbled with the latch, fingers clumsy with cold despite the thick leather, and practically fell through the doorway into the darkness within. The wind tried to follow him inside, shrieking like a living thing denied its prey, but Jonas threw his weight against the door and slammed it shut, dropping the heavy bar into place. The silence was profound after the howling chaos outside. Jonas stood in the darkness, breathing hard, listening to his own heartbeat gradually slow from its panicked gallop. Ice crackled as it fell from his beard and clothing. His muscles trembled with exhaustion and the first dangerous stages of deep cold. He needed fire, needed it desperately, but first he needed to get these frozen clothes off his body before the ice melted and soaked through to his skin. His hands worked automatically, stripping away the frozen outer layers with practiced efficiency despite the darkness. He had lived in this cabin for 8 years, knew every inch of it by touch alone. The fur coat went on its peg, the leather gloves on the shelf, his boots by the door where they would not track snow across the floor. He was down to his wool undershirt and pants when he reached for the tinderbox on the mantel, his fingers finally starting to register feeling again as warmth crept back into them. The first spark caught, then another, and soon Jonas had coaxed a small flame into existence among the kindling in his fireplace. He fed it carefully, adding larger pieces of wood only when the flames were strong enough to handle them, building the fire up until heat began to radiate into the single-room cabin. Only then did he allow himself to relax slightly, to consider his situation. He was trapped. That much was certain. This was no ordinary storm that would blow through in a few hours. Jonas could feel it in his bones, in the very way the wind screamed against the cabin walls. 3 days, maybe 4, before this monster would exhaust itself and move on. He had plenty of wood stacked inside, enough food for a week if he was careful, and water was no concern with snow piled high outside. He would be fine. The fire was burning well now, pushing back the darkness, and Jonas turned to survey his domain. Everything was exactly as he had left it that morning. The rough-hewn table and single chair, the shelves lined with supplies, the hooks where his tools hung, the bearskin rug before the fireplace, his bed against the far wall covered with layers of furs and blankets. His bed where someone was sleeping. Jonas froze, every muscle tensing, his hand dropping automatically to the knife at his belt. Someone was in his bed. He could see the shape now, a human form buried beneath his furs, so still it might have been a corpse. How had he missed it? But he knew the answer even as the question formed. The darkness, his exhaustion, his single-minded focus on getting warm. He had been barely conscious when he stumbled inside, operating purely on instinct and muscle memory. He approached slowly, knife drawn, every sense alert for danger. But as he drew closer, details began to emerge in the firelight. Small feet protruding from beneath the furs, a slender hand resting on the pillow, long dark hair spread across the blanket like spilled ink. A woman. A woman had somehow found her way into his isolated cabin and collapsed in his bed. Jonas reached out carefully and touched her hand, ice cold. He pressed 2 fingers to her wrist, feeling for a pulse, and found it, weak but steady. Alive then, but barely. He pulled back the furs to see her better, and his breath caught. She was young, perhaps 22 or 23, with delicate features that even in unconsciousness held a haunting beauty. Her clothes were all wrong for the mountains, a dress that belonged in a town parlor, not the wilderness, torn and soaked through in places. Her lips were blue with cold, her skin pale as snow. She was dying. Without intervention, she would slip from unconsciousness into death before morning. Jonas knew hypothermia when he saw it. He had pulled men from snowdrifts before, seen what deep cold did to the body. But those had been trappers, hunters, men who understood the mountains and had simply been caught out by bad luck. This woman had no business being up here at all. What had brought her to his isolated cabin miles from the nearest settlement? Questions for later. Right now, she needed warmth. Jonas worked quickly, his movements efficient despite the urgency. He stripped away her wet outer garments, replacing them with dry blankets from his chest, piling every fur and quilt he owned over her shivering body. He built up the fire until the cabin was almost uncomfortably warm. He heated water and tried to get some into her mouth, but she was too far gone to swallow, and he dared not risk choking her. The bed was the warmest place, surrounded by his furs, and that was where she needed to stay, which meant Jonas would be spending the night elsewhere. He dragged the bearskin rug closer to the fire and settled onto it, wrapping himself in his still damp coat since he had given her all his blankets. It would be uncomfortable, but he had endured worse. Much worse. And something about leaving her alone in the bed, while she fought for her life, felt wrong, as if his presence nearby might somehow anchor her to the world of the living. The storm raged on through the night, shaking the cabin with each massive gust, piling snow against the walls until Jonas knew they would be buried completely by morning. He fed the fire religiously, never letting it drop below a roaring blaze, and checked on the woman every hour. By midnight, some color had returned to her cheeks. By the darkest hours before dawn, her breathing had deepened and steadied. She would live. Jonas dozed fitfully on the hard floor, his body too conditioned to danger to truly sleep with a stranger in his home. But exhaustion eventually claimed him, and when he opened his eyes again, gray dawn light was filtering through the gaps around the shuttered window. The storm still howled outside, perhaps even stronger than before. Snow had blown in through every tiny crack, creating small drifts in the corners of the cabin. The temperature had dropped so low that even with the fire blazing, Jonas could see his breath. He pushed himself upright with a groan, joints protesting. He was 32 years old, but mornings like this made him feel ancient. He added more wood to the fire and set a pot of snow to melt for water, then turned his attention back to his unexpected guest. She was awake. Dark eyes, wide with fear and confusion, stared at him from the nest of furs. Jonas froze, suddenly aware of how he must look to her. A massive man, 6'4" and built like a grizzly bear, with wild dark hair hanging past his shoulders, a full beard and clothing that marked him as someone who had left civilization far behind. His hands alone were enormous, scarred and calloused from years of hard labor. He probably looked like something out of a nightmare. "Easy," he said, keeping his voice low and calm, the way he would speak to a spooked horse. "You are safe. You collapsed in my cabin during the storm. I found you last night." She did not respond, just continued to stare at him with those huge dark eyes. Jonas could see her mind working, trying to process where she was and how she had gotten here, probably not remembering anything clearly through the haze of hypothermia and exhaustion. "My name is Jonas Emmett," he continued, staying exactly where he was, making no move toward her. "This is my cabin. We are about 15 miles north of Julesburg, up in the high country. There is a blizzard outside that has been going for near 20 hours now. We are snowed in. Still nothing." But he saw her eyes flick to the door, calculating. He shook his head slowly. "You cannot go out there. The storm would kill you in minutes. You barely survived getting here, wherever you came from. You were nearly frozen to death when I found you." "You," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper, raw and rough. "You did not." She did not finish the sentence, but Jonas understood. His jaw tightened. "No, I did nothing but try to keep you alive. I removed your wet clothes because they would have killed you, and I gave you every blanket I own. I slept by the fire. You were unconscious the entire time." Relief flooded her features, followed immediately by shame. "I am sorry. I did not mean to suggest. I do not know you." "You do not," Jonas agreed. "And you have every right to be cautious. But right now we are stuck together until this storm passes. Might be 3 days or more. So we had best figure out how to coexist without killing each other." A ghost of a smile flickered across her face and vanished just as quickly. 3 days, at least. This is a bad one, worst I have seen in years. He moved slowly to the stove, keeping his movements deliberate and predictable. "You should eat something if you can, get your strength back. You have been through an ordeal." "I do not remember," she said softly. "I remember walking. It was so cold. I saw a light, I think, or maybe I imagined it. Then nothing until I woke up just now. You found my cabin somehow, lucky thing. There is nothing else for miles in any direction. If you had missed it, had walked past in the storm." He trailed off. They both knew what would have happened. Jonas busied himself preparing food, giving her space to process. He made simple fare, cornmeal mush with a bit of honey and some dried meat, but it was hot and filling. He brought a bowl to her carefully, setting it on the small table beside the bed, then retreated back to the fire. She struggled to sit up, and Jonas had to force himself not to help. She needed to feel in control, to not have this strange mountain man towering over her. She managed it finally, pulling the furs up to maintain her modesty, and reached for the bowl with shaking hands. They ate in silence, the storm providing a constant backdrop of howling wind and driving snow. Jonas watched her from the corner of his eye, noting the way she ate despite obvious hunger, the careful grace of her movements even in her weakened state. This was no saloon girl or frontier woman. Everything about her spoke of education and refinement. What in God's name was she doing in the Colorado mountains in the middle of winter? "Thank you," she said when she had finished, setting the bowl aside. "For saving my life, for being decent. I am." She paused, seeming to struggle with something, then continued. "My name is Olivia Vale." Pleased to meet you, Miss Vale, though I wish it were under better circumstances. Jonas collected her bowl and cleaned it, then poured hot water into 2 tin cups and added some dried herbs. Not real tea, but close enough. He brought one to her, then settled back on the bearskin rug with his own. You feel up to telling me how you ended up at my door. Julesburg is 15 miles south, and there is nothing but wilderness between here and there. Women do not generally go wandering in these mountains alone. Olivia wrapped her hands around the cup, staring into the steaming liquid. I was running from Julesburg, from... She stopped, swallowed hard. It does not matter now. I just needed to get away. I took a horse from the stable, started riding north. I thought there might be settlements, mining camps, somewhere I could disappear, but the storm came so fast. The horse threw me and ran. I was lost within minutes. I just kept walking because stopping meant dying. And then I saw your cabin, or thought I did. Everything after that is blur. You are lucky to be alive, Jonas said flatly. Those mountains do not forgive mistakes, and what you did was one hell of a mistake. You could have died a dozen different ways before ever reaching my door. I know. Her voice was small, but I was desperate. Sometimes death seems preferable to certain alternatives. Jonas studied her carefully. There was a story here, something dark and painful, but he did not press. She would tell him or she would not. They had time. Well, you are alive now, and you will stay that way if I have anything to say about it. Once this storm clears, we can figure out what comes next. But right now, you need to rest and recover. You pushed your body past its limits. It will take time to heal. I cannot go back, she said suddenly, urgently. To Julesburg, I cannot. Please do not make me. I am not in the business of making anyone do anything, Jonas replied. You are a free woman as far as I am concerned. But Miss Vale, you need to understand something. This cabin is it. I have no neighbors, no nearby town except Julesburg. When the storm clears, your options are limited. You can try to make it somewhere else, though I cannot recommend it this time of year. You can go back to Julesburg, or... He hesitated. Or you can stay here for a while, until you figure out what you want to do next. I have supplies enough for 2 for a good stretch. It would not be proper, of course, unmarried woman and man living under one roof. But there is no one up here to gossip, and practical survival trumps propriety in my book. Olivia stared at him as if he had suddenly sprouted a second head. You would let me stay, a complete stranger. I cannot throw you out into a blizzard, Jonas said dryly. And once the storm clears, well, that is your decision to make. But the offer stands. I am not saying it would be comfortable or easy. I live rough up here, but it beats freezing to death or going back to whatever you were running from. Tears suddenly spilled down her cheeks, and she covered her face with her hands. Jonas looked away, uncomfortable with the display of emotion but understanding it. She had been through hell, and now a stranger was offering her kindness with no apparent strings attached. In his experience, that was rare enough to be shocking. Thank you, she whispered. I do not understand why you would help me, but thank you. Maybe I am just tired of talking to myself, Jonas said, trying to lighten the mood. 8 years alone in these mountains, a man starts having conversations with the furniture. You are doing me a favor, really. That startled a laugh out of her, watery but genuine. Jonas felt something strange shift in his chest at the sound. When was the last time he had heard a woman laugh? Years. Many years. The rest of that first day passed quietly. The storm continued to rage with unrelenting fury, piling snow higher and higher against the cabin walls. Jonas kept the fire burning and prepared simple meals. Olivia slept for long stretches, her body demanding rest to recover from the ordeal she had endured. When she was awake, they talked carefully, sharing small pieces of themselves while dancing around the larger truths. Jonas told her about his life as a mountain man, the trap lines and hunting that sustained him, the brutal beauty of the high country and the harsh demands it made on those who chose to live here. He spoke of the seasons, the wildlife, the constant challenge of survival in an environment that killed without hesitation or remorse. He did not tell her about the past he had left behind, the reasons he had fled civilization for this isolated existence. Olivia shared equally measured information. She had come to Colorado from Ohio, traveling west with her aunt after the death of her parents. They had settled in Julesburg 6 months ago. Her aunt had passed away 3 weeks prior, leaving Olivia alone in a rough frontier town with limited options and no family. She did not explain what had driven her to flee so desperately into the mountains, and Jonas did not ask. By the second day, they had fallen into an awkward but functional routine. Olivia was stronger now, able to move around the cabin, though Jonas insisted she stay wrapped in furs near the fire. He gave her his bed again that night, settling onto the bearskin rug despite her protests. It felt right, somehow, to have her in the warmest, safest spot. His protective instincts, long dormant, had roared back to life the moment he found her in his bed, and they showed no signs of quieting. The storm showed no sign of breaking. If anything, it seemed to intensify. Snow had completely covered the windows now, and the door was blocked by a drift Jonas estimated at 6 feet or more. They were truly trapped, buried alive in a tiny wooden box while nature demonstrated its terrible power all around them. "Does it frighten you?" Olivia asked on the third day. They were sitting near the fire, Jonas repairing a trap while Olivia mended a tear in one of his shirts that she had noticed. Being so isolated, knowing that if something went wrong there would be no help, Jonas considered the question. "Sometimes," he admitted. "When I first came up here, every storm felt like a death sentence. Every noise outside made me think wolves or bears had come calling. But you adapt. Learn to trust your preparations and your instincts. After a while, the isolation becomes normal, comfortable, even." "I cannot imagine it," Olivia said softly. "I have always been surrounded by people. Even when I felt alone, there were always others nearby. The thought of months with no human contact seems unbearable. It has its advantages. No one judges you. No one makes demands. You answer only to yourself and the mountain. There is a freedom in that." He glanced up from his work, meeting her eyes. "Though I admit, having someone to talk to these past few days has been nice. I had forgotten what that was like." She smiled, and Jonas felt that strange shift in his chest again. She was beautiful when she smiled, truly beautiful. The fear that had haunted her eyes that first morning had gradually faded, replaced by something warmer. She was beginning to trust him, he realized, to feel safe here. "Can I ask you something?" Olivia said hesitantly. "You can ask. Whether I answer depends on the question." "Why did you come here? To the mountains, I mean. You obviously were not always a mountain man. The way you speak, your manners, even buried under all that wilderness roughness. You came from somewhere else, had another life." Jonas set down his trap, his jaw tightening. He had known this question would come eventually. "I had my reasons. They are not particularly interesting or noble. I just needed to get away from people, from the life I was living. So I came here." "Was it a woman?" The question was quiet, almost whispered. "No," Jonas said firmly. "No woman, just I made mistakes. Bad ones. People got hurt because of my choices. I could not live with myself and what I had become. So I walked away from all of it, came up here where the only person I could hurt was myself." Olivia studied him for a long moment. "I think you are harder on yourself than you need to be. Whatever you did, whatever mistakes you made, you have surely paid for them 10 times over living up here alone for 8 years. Maybe," Jonas said. "Or maybe this is exactly the penance I deserve." They lapsed into silence, but it was comfortable rather than awkward. The storm howled on outside, but inside the cabin, warmth and an unexpected companionship were growing. Jonas found himself watching Olivia more and more, noticing small details. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. The small furrow that appeared between her eyebrows when she concentrated on a task. The melodic quality of her voice when she spoke. He was in dangerous territory, and he knew it. She was a woman alone, vulnerable, dependent on him for survival. The last thing she needed was him developing feelings that could make an already complicated situation worse. And yet, he could not seem to stop himself from being drawn to her, from wanting to know everything about her, from feeling a fierce protectiveness that went far beyond simple human decency. On the fourth morning, Jonas woke to an unfamiliar sensation. Silence. The wind had finally stopped. He pushed himself up from the bearskin rug and moved to the door, listening. Nothing but the profound quiet that came after a major storm. It was over. Is it done? Olivia's voice came from the bed. She was awake, watching him. "I believe so," Jonas confirmed. He began the laborious process of digging out, using a shovel to clear the drift that had piled against the door. It took the better part of an hour, but eventually he broke through to open air and sunlight so bright it hurt his eyes after days of darkness. The world had been transformed. Snow lay in massive drifts, sculpted by the wind into fantastic shapes. The trees were buried to their lower branches. Everything was white and pristine and deadly beautiful. The sky above was a perfect crystalline blue, and the temperature had plummeted even further now that the clouds had cleared. Jonas turned back to find Olivia standing in the doorway, wrapped in furs, staring at the transformed landscape with wonder and horror. "How do you survive in this?" she breathed. "Very carefully," Jonas replied, "and with a lot of planning. Come on back inside before you catch your death. I need to check the storage shed and make sure the snow did not damage anything, but you should stay warm." He spent the next several hours digging out paths, checking his supplies and assessing the situation. Everything was intact, thankfully. He had enough firewood to last another month if they were careful, plenty of food, and the cabin itself had weathered the storm without any damage. They were secure for now, but the storm's end also meant that decisions needed to be made. Olivia would have to choose what to do next. Go back to Julesburg, strike out for another town, or stay here with him. Jonas found himself dreading her choice, terrified that she would leave and he would return to his lonely existence, now made 1,000 times worse by having experienced her company. That night, after a meal of venison stew and fresh bread Jonas had baked in his Dutch oven, Olivia finally told him the truth about why she had fled Julesburg. "There was a man," she began, staring into her cup. "Cyrus Blackwell. He owns most of the town, the saloons and businesses. After my aunt died, he decided he wanted me. Not as a wife, mind you, but as something else. He made his intentions clear. When I refused, he became angry, threatened me, said I had no choice, that I was alone with no protection, and he always got what he wanted." Jonas felt rage building in his chest, hot and fierce. His hands clenched into fists. "Did he hurt you?" he tried, Olivia said quietly. 3 days before I fled, he came to my room at the boarding house, forced his way in. I managed to fight him off, stabbed him in the arm with my scissors. But he promised he would be back, that next time I would not be so lucky, so I ran. I knew he would come for me again, and no one in town would stop him. He owns the marshal. He owns everything." "That is why you cannot go back," Jonas said, understanding flooding through him. "He would find you." "Yes, and I would rather die free in these mountains than live as his prisoner in Julesburg." She looked up at him, and he saw the strength beneath her delicate exterior, the steel core that had enabled her to survive what would have killed most people. "So if your offer still stands, if you meant it when you said I could stay here for a while, then that is what I would like to do. Stay until spring, perhaps, and then make my way to Denver or somewhere far enough away that Cyrus Blackwell cannot find me." Jonas nodded slowly. "The offer stands. You can stay as long as you need. But Miss Vale, you need to understand what you are agreeing to. Winter up here is brutal. We will be snowed in again, probably several times. The work is hard and the conditions are harsh. It will not be comfortable." "I do not need comfort," Olivia said firmly. "I need safety. I need time to figure out my next move without looking over my shoulder every moment. Can you give me that?" "Yes," Jonas said without hesitation. "Yes, I can give you that. No one will hurt you here. I promise you that." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went deeper than words. Olivia was placing her trust, her very life, in his hands. And Jonas was accepting that responsibility, taking on the role of protector, provider, guardian. It should have felt like a burden, but instead it felt like purpose, like something he had been missing for the past 8 years without even knowing it. The days began to flow together after that. Jonas taught Olivia the skills she would need to survive in the mountains. How to properly dress for the cold, layering furs and leather to trap heat. How to read the weather, recognizing the subtle signs that indicated an incoming storm. How to preserve meat, prepare hides, and make the most of every resource. She proved to be a quick study, intelligent and adaptable, throwing herself into learning with fierce determination. In return, Olivia brought something to the cabin that Jonas had not realized he was missing. Laughter. Conversation. The simple pleasure of sharing a meal with another person, of having someone ask how his day went, of hearing about thoughts and ideas beyond his own limited perspective. She also imposed order on his bachelor chaos, organizing his supplies with efficient practicality, and insisting on standards of cleanliness that Jonas had long since abandoned. They were careful to maintain propriety as much as possible in the confined space. Olivia slept in the bed, Jonas on the bearskin rug by the fire. They dressed and undressed with their backs turned or in the brief moments of privacy afforded when one of them stepped outside. They never touched beyond the accidental brush of hands or the necessary physical contact of working together in close quarters. But the awareness was always there, simmering just beneath the surface. Jonas caught himself watching Olivia when she was absorbed in a task, admiring the graceful economy of her movements, the way firelight caught in her dark hair. More than once, he turned to find her watching him with an expression he could not quite read, something complex and searching. December gave way to January, and still Olivia remained. More storms came and went. Jonas continued his work on the trap lines when weather permitted, and Olivia insisted on learning to help, accompanying him on his rounds despite the dangerous cold. She wanted to be useful, she said, to earn her keep rather than simply taking his charity. Jonas had argued that saving her life entitled her to anything she needed, but he understood her pride and did not push the issue. It was during one of these trap runs, about 6 weeks after Olivia had arrived, that everything changed. They were checking a line to the east of the cabin, a route that took them through a narrow canyon Jonas had always found beautiful in its stark magnificence. The morning was clear and cold, the kind of crystalline winter day where every breath burned and the snow crunched underfoot with a distinctive squeak. They had checked 3 traps already, all empty, and were approaching the 4th when Jonas heard it. A deep, rumbling growl that made every hair on his body stand on end. Bear, a grizzly by the sound of it and close. Jonas grabbed Olivia's arm and pulled her behind him in one smooth motion, his other hand reaching for the rifle slung across his back. "Do not move," he whispered. "Do not run. Stay behind me." The bear emerged from behind a boulder, massive and terrifying. It was a male, easily 800 pounds, with a coat turned white by frost and small, intelligent eyes that assessed them with unsettling focus. It should have been hibernating, Jonas thought distantly. Something had woken it, probably hunger driving it from its den in search of food. A desperate, hungry bear was one of the most dangerous things in the mountains. The grizzly rose onto its hind legs, towering over them, and roared. The sound was deafening, a challenge and warning combined. Jonas felt Olivia's hand clutch the back of his coat, felt her trembling against his back, but she did not scream or run. She trusted him to handle this, and that trust steadied him. "Back away slowly," Jonas murmured. "Stay behind me. Do not break eye contact with it." They began to retreat, one careful step at a time. The bear dropped back to all fours and swung its massive head, tracking their movement. It took a step forward, then another. It was following them, and Jonas knew with sinking certainty that they were not going to be able to simply walk away from this encounter. "If I tell you to run," Jonas said quietly, "you run straight back toward the cabin and you do not look back. Understand?" "No," Olivia said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I will not leave you. If it charges, you cannot help me. All you will do is get yourself killed. Promise me you will run." Jonas, the bear, charged. It happened so fast that later, Jonas would struggle to piece together the exact sequence of events. One moment the grizzly was watching them, the next it was a roaring mass of fur and teeth closing the distance at terrifying speed. Jonas shoved Olivia to the side hard enough to send her sprawling into a snowbank, brought his rifle up and fired. The shot took the bear in the chest, but it barely slowed. He worked the lever action, fired again, this time hitting the shoulder. Still it came. Jonas threw himself to the side as the bear reached him, barely avoiding paws that could have gutted him with a single swipe. He rolled, came up with his knife in hand since there was no time to reload, and faced the wounded, enraged animal. This was it, he thought with strange clarity. This was how he would die, torn apart by a grizzly while trying to protect the woman he had fallen in love with. The thought stopped him cold. Love. When had that happened? When had Olivia gone from stranger to companion to the center of his entire world? The bear reared up again, preparing for a killing blow, and Jonas braced himself. But the attack never came. Instead, the grizzly suddenly roared in pain and confusion, swinging around to face this new threat. Olivia had found a dead branch and driven it like a spear into the bear's hindquarters, then retreated quickly before it could reach her. The distraction gave Jonas the opening he needed. He darted forward and drove his knife into the bear's throat with all the strength in his powerful arms, finding the artery and severing it cleanly. Blood sprayed hot across the snow. The grizzly flailed, caught Jonas with a glancing blow that sent him flying, then collapsed, thrashing for a few final moments before going still. Jonas lay in the snow, gasping, pain radiating from his ribs where the bear had struck him. Broken, probably, or at least badly bruised. He heard Olivia calling his name, felt her hands on his face, her voice high with fear. "I am all right," he managed. "Just knocked the wind out of me. Are you hurt?" No, I am fine." "Oh God, Jonas, there is so much blood." "Bear's blood, not mine," Jonas said, pushing himself upright with a groan. "Mostly. Help me up." She got him to his feet, and together they stood looking at the dead grizzly. Jonas felt a strange mixture of regret and relief. The animal had only been following its instincts, but it had been them or it, and he had made his choice. "You did not run," Jonas said, turning to look at Olivia. I told you to run. And I told you I would not leave you, she replied, meeting his eyes steadily. Did you really think I would? I hoped you would. You could have been killed. So could you? That was the bravest, most foolish thing I have ever seen, facing down that monster to protect me. Not foolish, Jonas said softly. Necessary. I could not let it hurt you. I would die before I let anything hurt you. Olivia stared at him, something shifting in her expression. Jonas. He cupped her face in his hands, ignoring the pain in his ribs, ignoring everything except the woman in front of him. I know this is not the time, and I know I have no right, but I need to say it. I love you, Olivia. I think I have loved you since the moment I found you in my bed, though I have been too much of a coward to admit it even to myself. You do not have to feel the same way. You do not have to say anything at all. I just needed you to know. Tears spilled down her cheeks, freezing in the cold air. You beautiful, ridiculous man. I have been in love with you for weeks. I was terrified you only saw me as an obligation, someone to protect and nothing more. But when I saw that bear charging you, when I thought I was going to watch you die, I knew I could not keep pretending anymore. I love you, Jonas Emmett. I love everything about you. Jonas kissed her then, there in the snow beside the dead grizzly, with the winter sun shining down and the mountains bearing witness. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms wrapping around his neck, apparently not caring about the blood and dirt that covered them both. It was wild and passionate and absolutely perfect. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jonas rested his forehead against hers. We should probably get this bear back to the cabin. That is a lot of meat and a valuable hide. Waste not, want not. Olivia laughed, the sound bright and joyous. Only you would be thinking about practical matters at a time like this. 8 years in the mountains teaches you to take advantage of opportunities, Jonas said with a grin. Besides, we need to get you somewhere warm. You are shivering. That is not from the cold, Olivia said, but she helped him begin the laborious process of preparing the bear for transport anyway. It took most of the day to get the bear back to the cabin and begin processing the carcass. Jonas's ribs protested every movement, but he pushed through the pain, working with practiced efficiency. Olivia helped where she could, following his instructions without complaint despite the unpleasant nature of the work. By the time darkness fell, they had the meat hung in the cold storage shed, the hide staked out to begin the tanning process, and themselves scrubbed reasonably clean. Jonas's ribs were bound tight, and Olivia had tended to the various scrapes and bruises they had both accumulated. They sat before the fire, exhausted and sore, but alive and together. That was the most terrifying day of my life, Olivia said quietly, and also somehow the best. Jonas pulled her closer against his side, careful of his injured ribs. I understand what you mean. I thought I had lost you before I even really had you, but we survived, and now everything is different. What happens now? Olivia asked. With us, I mean. We love each other, but Jonas, I am still a woman with no prospects, running from a dangerous man in Julesburg. You are a mountain man who has built a life of isolation. How do we make this work? I do not know, Jonas admitted, but we will figure it out together. Maybe you stay here with me, make this your home too. Maybe we find somewhere else, start fresh where no one knows either of us. Maybe we go back to Julesburg and deal with Cyrus Blackwell once and for all. I do not have all the answers, Olivia, but I know I want you in my life, whatever that life looks like. We can work out the details as we go. You would leave the mountains, for me. Jonas looked around his cabin, at the life he had built over 8 years. It had been enough when he thought he deserved nothing better, when he believed he needed to punish himself for past sins. But Olivia had changed everything. She had brought light and warmth and purpose back into his existence. She had reminded him that he was more than his mistakes, that he deserved happiness and connection. "Yes," he said simply. "I would leave for you. The mountains will always be here. But you, Olivia Vale, you are a once-in-a-lifetime gift. I would be the biggest fool alive to choose loneliness over a life with you." She kissed him again, soft and sweet this time, full of promise and love. "Then we will figure it out together," she whispered against his lips. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." The winter deepened, but inside the cabin, warmth and love flourished. Jonas and Olivia fell into a new routine, one that included stolen kisses and long conversations that stretched late into the night. They talked about everything, sharing the details of their lives, their hopes and dreams, their fears and regrets. Jonas told her about his past, the mistakes he had made back in Missouri that had driven him into exile. He had been part of a gang, done things he was not proud of, and when a robbery went wrong and people died, he had walked away from it all, unable to live with the guilt. Olivia listened without judgment, holding his hands as he spoke, her presence a balm to wounds he had thought would never heal. She shared her own story in full, the desperation and fear that had defined her final days in Julesburg, the courage it had taken to flee into the unknown rather than submit to Cyrus Blackwell's demands. As January turned to February, their relationship deepened. Jonas had never been so happy, had never imagined he could feel this way about another person. Olivia transformed his rough cabin into a home, filled it with laughter and warmth, and a sense of belonging he had not felt in years. And though they maintained propriety, sleeping separately and carefully preserving the boundaries appropriate for an unmarried couple, the desire between them was palpable, an ever-present tension that made every accidental touch electric. It was on a bitterly cold night in late February that Jonas made his decision. They were sitting before the fire, Olivia reading aloud from one of his few books while Jonas repaired a harness, when he suddenly set down his work. "Marry me," he said abruptly. Olivia stopped reading, looking up in surprise. "What? Marry me?" Jonas repeated, moving to kneel before her. "I know I am not much of a catch. I am a mountain man who lives in the middle of nowhere with a past full of mistakes and a present full of hardship. But I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. So marry me, Olivia. Be my wife. Let me be your husband. Let us build a life together, whatever and wherever that life may be." Tears were streaming down her face now, but she was smiling, radiant and beautiful. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, Jonas, of course I will marry you. There is nothing I want more." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, pouring 8 years of loneliness and longing into the embrace. She responded with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his long hair, pulling him closer. The kiss went on, neither of them wanting to break apart, until finally Jonas pulled back slightly, breathing hard. "We should probably figure out the practical details," he said, his voice rough with emotion and desire. "Find a preacher, make it official." "The nearest preacher is in Julesburg," Olivia said, "and I cannot go back there. Then we will go somewhere else. Fort Collins, maybe, or one of the mining camps. Somewhere far enough from Julesburg that we do not risk running into Blackwell." Jonas thought for a moment. "In fact, I have been thinking, maybe it is time I stopped hiding up here. Maybe it is time to build a real life, one with you at the center of it. We could head to Denver in the spring, start fresh. I could find work, real work. We could have a home, neighbors, be part of a community." "You would do that?" Olivia asked softly. "Give up the mountains?" "I am not giving them up," Jonas said. "I am choosing something better. I am choosing you. The mountains taught me how to survive, gave me space to come to terms with my past. But you, Olivia, you have given me a reason to truly live again. That is worth more than all the isolation in the world." They made their plans that night, talking late into the darkness. When spring came and the high passes cleared, they would make their way down from the mountains. Jonas would sell his furs and whatever supplies he did not need, giving them a stake to start fresh. They would travel to Fort Collins first, find a preacher and make their union official, then continue on to Denver, where the growing city offered opportunities for those willing to work hard. But first, they had to survive the rest of the winter. And Colorado winters, Jonas knew from bitter experience, always saved the worst for last. March came in like a lion, bringing another massive storm that buried the cabin for nearly a week. They weathered it together, and Jonas found himself grateful for the isolation. It gave them time, uninterrupted days and nights to simply be together, to learn every detail of each other, to build the foundation of what would be a lifetime partnership. When the storm finally broke and Jonas dug them out once more, spring was beginning to assert itself. The days were noticeably longer, the sun higher in the sky. Snowmelt began in earnest, creating streams and waterfalls where none had existed before. The world was waking up, and with it came the possibility of travel. Jonas spent the next 2 weeks preparing. He collected all his furs and bundled them for transport. He packed supplies and equipment, deciding what to take and what to leave behind. The cabin itself he would leave intact. Perhaps another lost soul would find it someday, would use it as he had, as a refuge from whatever demons pursued them. Olivia helped with everything, her efficiency and organizational skills proving invaluable. She seemed to possess boundless energy, excited about the future they were building together. Jonas caught himself simply watching her sometimes, marveling at how drastically his life had changed in just 4 months. He had gone from a lonely, self-exiled mountain man to a man in love, planning a future, ready to rejoin the world he had fled. It was during one of these preparation sessions that Jonas heard horses approaching. The sound was distinctive, multiple riders moving at a steady pace. Jonas felt ice form in his stomach. No one came up to his cabin. No one even knew exactly where it was. This could only mean trouble. "Get inside," he told Olivia urgently. "Hide. Do not come out unless I tell you to." Jonas, "What now, Olivia, please?" She must have heard something in his voice because she obeyed without further argument, disappearing into the cabin. Jonas checked his rifle, made sure his knife was secure, and stepped out into the clearing before his home to face whoever was coming. 5 men emerged from the tree line, riding hard-used horses that steamed in the cool air. Jonas assessed them with a trapper's eye for detail. Armed, every one of them with the look of men accustomed to violence. The leader was a big man, though not as big as Jonas, with cold eyes and a bandaged arm, Cyrus Blackwell. Jonas knew it without being told. This was the man who had threatened Olivia, who had driven her into the mountains in fear for her life. "You must be the mountain man," Blackwell said, reining in his horse about 20 feet away. His voice was smooth, cultured, at odds with the brutality Jonas could see in his eyes. "I have been looking for you. More specifically, I have been looking for something that belongs to me. A woman. Dark hair, pretty little thing, goes by the name Olivia Vale. I have reason to believe she is here." "Do not know anyone by that name," Jonas lied calmly. "I live alone up here." "Have for years." "Is that so?" Blackwell smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Funny thing. I put out word in Julesburg that I was looking for Miss Vale, offered a reward." A trapper came forward, said he had seen smoke coming from this area more frequently than usual over the winter, as if maybe 2 people were keeping warm instead of 1. "So I thought I would ride up and check for myself." Still do not know who you are talking about, Jonas said. But I suggest you turn around and head back to wherever you came from. You are trespassing. Trespassing, Blackwell laughed. I like that. Boy, we are in the middle of the wilderness. There is no law up here except what men make, and I make my own law. He gestured, and his men began to spread out, flanking Jonas. Now I am going to search that cabin. You can step aside peaceful-like, or we can do this the hard way. Your choice. You are not going anywhere near that cabin, Jonas said flatly. His hands had not moved, but he was ready. He would die before he let these men take Olivia. The hard way, then. Blackwell nodded to his men. Take him. They came at him from 3 sides simultaneously. Jonas shot the first man, the rifle shot cracking loud in the mountain silence, the bullet taking him in the chest and dropping him instantly. He swung the rifle like a club, catching the second man across the jaw hard enough to send him sprawling. The third tackled him from behind, bearing him to the ground, and then they were all over him, fists and boots raining down. Jonas fought like a demon, his massive strength and mountain-hardened muscles serving him well. He got his hands around one man's throat and squeezed until something crunched. Another he threw bodily into a tree with force enough to snap bones. But there were too many of them, and he was taking terrible punishment. Blood flowed from a cut above his eye, and his ribs, still not fully healed from the bear attack, screamed in protest. He was losing. The realization came with cold clarity. They were going to beat him unconscious, probably kill him, and then they would take Olivia. Everything he had fought for, everything they had built together, would be destroyed. Then a shot rang out, and one of the men attacking Jonas jerked and fell, a red stain spreading across his back. Jonas looked up through his blood-soaked vision to see Olivia standing in the cabin doorway, his spare rifle in her hands, tears streaming down her face but her aim steady. "Get away from him," she screamed. "Get away, or I swear to God I will kill every last one of you." The remaining men scrambled back, hands raised. Blackwell had not moved, still sitting his horse, watching the scene with cold calculation. Jonas pushed himself to his feet, swaying but upright, and moved to stand beside Olivia. "Clever girl," Blackwell said. "But you know you cannot shoot all of us, and eventually that rifle will be empty. What happens then?" "Then I reload," Olivia said, her voice steadier than Jonas would have thought possible. "I have been learning survival skills all winter, Mr. Blackwell. Jonas taught me well, and I promise you I will never go with you. I would rather die free than live as your captive." "Touching," Blackwell said dryly. "But you are not thinking clearly. You are miles from anywhere, trapped up here with a half-dead mountain man. I am offering you a life of comfort and luxury. All you have to do is come back to Julesburg with me." "No," Olivia said simply. "I am exactly where I want to be, with exactly who I want to be with. You have no power over me anymore, Cyrus. You never did. I was just too frightened to see it clearly. But I am not frightened now. Now I am angry. You threatened me. You attacked me. You chased me into the wilderness and nearly killed me. And now you come here and hurt the man I love. So here is what is going to happen. You are going to take your remaining men and leave. If you ever come near me or Jonas again, I will kill you. And if you think I am bluffing, remember that I already shot one of your men. The second one will be easier." Silence fell over the clearing. Jonas felt pride swelling in his chest despite the pain racking his body. This was not the frightened woman he had found half frozen in his bed. This was a woman who had discovered her own strength, who had learned to stand and fight for what she wanted. Blackwell stared at her for a long moment, and Jonas could practically see him calculating the odds. 2 men dead, one probably dying from his injuries. 2 remaining, not counting himself. against two people who were clearly willing to die rather than surrender. The math was not in his favor, and Blackwell was nothing if not a practical man. "This is not over," Blackwell said finally. "You think you have won, but all you have done is delay the inevitable. I will be back, and next time I will bring more men, enough that your little rifle will not matter." "Then I guess we had better not be here when you return," Jonas said, his voice rough but firm, "because Miss Vale and I are leaving these mountains, going somewhere you will never find us. But if you somehow manage to track us down, if you ever threaten her again, I will finish what we started here today." "That is not a threat, Blackwell. That is a promise." For a moment, Jonas thought Blackwell would push the issue, would order his remaining men to attack despite the odds. But then he wheeled his horse around with a curse. "Mount up," he barked to his men. "We are leaving, but this is not over," he repeated, pointing at Olivia. "You will regret crossing me." They watched in tense silence as Blackwell and his two remaining men collected their dead and injured and rode away into the trees. Only when the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely did Olivia finally lower the rifle, her hands beginning to shake with reaction. Jonas took the weapon from her gently and pulled her into his arms, ignoring the pain in his battered body. She collapsed against him, sobbing, all the fear and adrenaline finally catching up with her. "It is over," Jonas murmured into her hair. "You were magnificent. You saved my life." "I could not lose you," Olivia said between sobs. "I could not. When I saw them hurting you, I did not even think, I just acted." "Good instincts," Jonas said. "Remind me never to make you angry." That surprised a watery laugh out of her. They stood there in the clearing, holding each other, until Jonas's legs began to give out beneath him. Olivia helped him inside, sat him down, and began tending to his injuries with gentle efficiency. He had taken a severe beating, but nothing was broken that had not been broken before, and his mountain-tough constitution would see him through. "We need to leave," Olivia said as she worked. "Now, today if possible." Blackwell meant what he said. He will be back with more men. "I know," Jonas agreed, "but we need to be smart about this. Head in a different direction than we planned, throw him off our trail, and we need to move fast, cover as much ground as possible before he can organize another attempt." They spent the rest of that day in frantic preparation. Jonas pushed his battered body to its limits, packing only what they absolutely needed, preparing the horses he kept for the rare occasions he traveled to trade. They would leave at first light, head west instead of south, make for the mining country where they could disappear among the crowds of prospectors and fortune-seekers. That night, lying on the bearskin rug together, Jonas held Olivia close and made a decision. "When we get somewhere safe," he said quietly, "we are getting married immediately, not waiting until we reach Fort Collins or Denver. The first town we hit with a preacher, we are making this official." "Why the rush?" Olivia asked, though she was smiling. "Because I almost lost you today," Jonas said fiercely. "Because life is uncertain and tomorrow is never guaranteed, especially out here. Because I want you to be my wife in every way that matters, and I do not want to wait another day longer than necessary. And because," he added, his voice softening, "I love you more than I have ever loved anything in my life, and I want the whole world to know you are mine and I am yours." "Then we will get married at the first opportunity," Olivia agreed. She kissed him softly. "I love you, Jonas Emmett. Whatever comes next, whatever we have to face, I love you." They left at dawn, riding west into the rising sun, leaving the cabin and the life Jonas had built behind. It should have felt like loss, but instead it felt like liberation. He was not running this time, was not fleeing in shame and regret. He was riding toward a future, with the woman he loved at his side. The journey was hard. They pushed the horses as fast as they dared through the rough mountain terrain, always aware that Blackwell might be pursuing them. They took indirect routes, doubled back on their tracks, did everything Jonas knew to obscure their trail. At night they made cold camps, too nervous to risk a fire that might give away their position. 3 days of hard riding brought them to a small mining camp called Silver Creek, nestled in a valley on the western slope of the Rockies. It was rough and tumble, full of prospectors and gamblers and all the chaos that came with gold fever, but it also had a preacher, a circuit rider who happened to be passing through. Jonas and Olivia were married that same day, in a ceremony that lasted all of 10 minutes, performed in a canvas tent that served as the camp's church. There were no guests beyond 2 miners Jonas convinced to serve as witnesses, no flowers or fancy clothes or any of the trappings people associated with weddings. But when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, when Jonas kissed his bride for the first time as a married man, none of that mattered. They were together, legally and officially, bound by love and law. They spent their wedding night in the camp's only boarding house, in a tiny room with thin walls and a lumpy bed, and it was perfect. Jonas made love to his wife with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless, discovering each other with the joy and wonder of 2 people who had fought for their happiness, and won. The next morning, they continued west, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and Julesburg, between themselves and Cyrus Blackwell and his threats. They traveled through mining country, through small settlements and wild expanses, until they finally reached the larger town of Leadville in late April. Leadville was booming, a city grown fat on silver strikes, full of opportunity for those willing to work. Jonas found employment with a freight company, his massive strength and knowledge of mountain terrain making him invaluable. Olivia took work as a seamstress, her skills with needle and thread in high demand. They rented a small house on the edge of town, nothing fancy but clean and solid, and began building the life they had dreamed of during those long winter nights in the cabin. Months passed. Spring turned to summer, summer to fall. No sign of Blackwell. No indication that he had managed to track them down. Slowly they began to relax, to believe that maybe they had truly escaped, that their new life was secure. Jonas thrived in Leadville. After 8 years of isolation, he found he enjoyed being part of a community again. He made friends among the freighters and miners, men who respected his strength and skill. And more than that, he enjoyed coming home each night to Olivia, to sharing meals and conversation, to falling asleep with her in his arms and waking to her smile each morning. Olivia blossomed as well. The fear that had haunted her in Julesburg faded, replaced by confidence and joy. She made friends among the other women in town, joined a church, became involved in the community. She was happy, truly happy, and watching her flourish filled Jonas with a contentment he had never known. In October, Olivia told him she was pregnant. Jonas had never wanted children, had never thought himself fit to be a father given his past and his years of isolation. But when Olivia placed his hand on her still flat stomach and told him he was going to be a papa, everything changed. Suddenly the future was not just about him and Olivia. It was about the family they were creating, the legacy they would leave. "Are you happy?" Olivia asked nervously when Jonas had been silent too long, processing the news. "Happy." Jonas pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet despite her laughing protests. "I am more than happy. I am terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once. We are going to have a baby, a family. Olivia, I love you so much." They spent the winter preparing. Jonas worked extra shifts to save money, building up a nest egg to support them when Olivia could no longer work. He built a cradle with his own hands, massive and sturdy, designed to last for generations. Olivia sewed baby clothes and blankets, preparing for the arrival with careful attention to every detail. Jonas also bought a small plot of land just outside Leadville, with a view of the mountains that reminded him of his cabin but close enough to town for convenience. He began building a house, working on it every spare moment he had, creating a home for his growing family. It would not be finished before the baby came, but that was all right. They would have it ready by the following summer, a solid foundation for the life they were building. Their son was born in late May of 1879, a healthy, squalling boy with dark hair like his mother and his father's large frame. They named him James, and Jonas held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by love and the weight of responsibility. "We made him," Olivia said softly from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "You and I together. Isn't not he perfect?" "He is," Jonas agreed, marveling at the tiny fingers, the miniature features. "He is absolutely perfect. Thank you, Olivia. Thank you for giving me this, for giving me everything." Fatherhood transformed Jonas in ways he could not have predicted. All the protective instincts that had awakened when he found Olivia in his cabin intensified 100-fold. He would have died for his wife. For his son, he would burn down the world. He threw himself into providing for his family, working harder than ever to ensure they had everything they needed. The house was finished by July, a solid 2-story structure with a wide porch and enough room for their growing family. They moved in on a bright summer day, carrying their possessions from the rental in town to their new home. Jonas carried Olivia over the threshold, both of them laughing, baby James cradled between them. "Welcome home," Jonas said, kissing his wife soundly. "To our home. The place where we will raise our children and grow old together." "It is perfect," Olivia said, looking around with shining eyes. "Everything is perfect. Jonas, when I ran from Julesburg, when I stumbled into that blizzard more dead than alive, I never imagined I would end up here. With you, with our son, with this beautiful life. I thought I was running from death. I had no idea I was actually running toward everything I ever wanted." "I know what you mean," Jonas said quietly. "I spent 8 years hiding in those mountains, convinced I did not deserve happiness or love or any kind of normal life. And then you appeared, and everything changed. You saved me, Olivia. You gave me a reason to live again, to hope again. I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you." "You already do," Olivia said, reaching up to touch his face. "Every single day you show me what a good man you are, a good husband, a good father. I am so grateful I found your cabin that night, that you found me, that we found each other." They stood together on the porch of their new home, watching the sun set over the mountains, their son sleeping peacefully in Olivia's arms. The future stretched before them, full of possibility and promise. There would be challenges, Jonas knew. Life was never easy, especially in Colorado in the late 1870s. But they would face everything together, as partners, as lovers, as a family. 2 years later, their daughter was born, a tiny girl with Jonas's blue eyes and Olivia's delicate features. They named her Catherine, and she completed their family in a way Jonas had not known was missing. He was surrounded by love, by laughter, by the kind of domestic happiness he had once thought was reserved for better men than himself. The freight company Jonas worked for promoted him to manager, recognizing his skill and dedication. The position came with better pay and less dangerous work, important considerations now that he had a family depending on him. Olivia continued her sewing, though now she worked from home, taking commissions from the wealthier families in Leadville who appreciated her skill and craftsmanship. They became pillars of their community, respected and well-liked. Jonas served on the town council, using his knowledge of the mountains to help plan safer routes for travel and freight. Olivia helped organize charity drives for families struggling with the harsh realities of frontier life. They hosted dinners and attended church, and participated in all the normal activities of a settled, respectable family. It was a life Jonas had never dared dream of during his years of self-imposed exile. A life he treasured with every fiber of his being. Years passed. James grew into a sturdy boy with his father's strength and his mother's quick mind. Catherine was bright and curious, always asking questions, always exploring. They were happy children, secure in the knowledge that they were loved beyond measure. Jonas never forgot the cabin in the high mountains, the place where his life had changed forever. Sometimes, when work took him into the high country, he would detour past it, checking to make sure it was still standing, still ready to serve as a refuge for some other lost soul. The cabin weathered the passing years well, a testament to the skill with which Jonas had built it. And sometimes, lying in bed at night with Olivia curled against his side, their children sleeping soundly down the hall, Jonas would think about that blizzard night in December of 1878. About the choices that had led him to that moment, about the woman he had found sleeping in his bed, more dead than alive, about the love that had grown between them in the cold and isolation of a brutal Colorado winter. "What are you thinking about?" Olivia would ask, sensing his mood. "Just remembering," Jonas would reply. "Remembering how lucky I am, how different my life could have been if you had not stumbled into my cabin that night, if I had not found you in time, if any one of 100 different things had gone differently." "But they did not," Olivia would remind him. "We found each other, we fought for each other, we built this life together, and we have so much more ahead of us still." She was right. They had decades ahead of them, God willing. Decades of watching their children grow, of growing old together, of building on the foundation they had established during that remarkable winter. The mountain man and the woman he had found half frozen in his bed. Two lost souls who had found each other in the wilderness and forged a love that would last a lifetime. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jonas took Olivia back to the cabin. It was summer, and the journey that had nearly killed her in winter was pleasant and beautiful under clear skies. They left the children with neighbors and made it an adventure, just the two of them, recapturing some of the intimacy of those early days. The cabin was exactly as Jonas had left it, a little more weathered but still solid. They spent 3 days there, reliving memories, talking about how far they had come. On the last night, they lay together under the firs on the same bed where Olivia had nearly died, and Jonas told her again how much he loved her, how grateful he was for every day they had together. "I would do it all again," Olivia said softly. "Every terrifying moment. The blizzard, the bear, Blackwell and his men, all of it, because it brought me to you. It gave me this life, this love. You are worth every hardship, Jonas Emmett. And you are worth every sacrifice," Jonas replied. "You are my heart, Olivia, my home, my everything." They returned to Leadville renewed and reconnected, ready to face whatever the future held. The years continued to flow by. James grew into a young man and followed his father into the freight business. Catherine married a kind young man who ran the general store and gave Jonas and Olivia their first grandchild. The circle of life continued its eternal turn, and through it all, Jonas and Olivia remained the center of their family, the foundation on which everything else was built. Jonas never did hear from Cyrus Blackwell again. He learned years later through the frontier grapevine that Blackwell had been shot and killed in a dispute over a gambling debt, less than a year after their confrontation at the cabin. The news brought relief more than satisfaction. That chapter of their lives was truly closed, the threat finally eliminated. As Jonas aged, his body bearing the accumulated wear of decades of hard labor and harsh conditions, he sometimes struggled with physical limitations that would have seemed impossible in his youth. But he never complained. How could he, when he had been granted so much more than he deserved? A loving wife, healthy children, grandchildren to dandle on his knee, and a life of purpose and meaning. In the spring of 1903, at the age of 57, Jonas sat on the porch of the house he had built with his own hands 24 years earlier. Olivia sat beside him, her hand in his, both of them watching their grandchildren play in the yard. The Colorado mountains rose in the distance, eternal and unchanging, the same peaks that had sheltered and nearly killed them both so long ago. "You ever regret it?" Olivia asked suddenly. "Leaving the mountains, trading that wild freedom for this settled life?" Jonas looked at her, at the woman who had transformed his existence, who had given him everything worth having. Her hair was gray now, her face lined with the passage of time, but to him she was just as beautiful as the day he had found her sleeping in his bed, fighting for her life against the cold. "Not for a single second," he said firmly. "I had 8 years in those mountains, Olivia. 8 years of isolation and penance and loneliness. Then I had 25 years with you watching our family grow, building something that will outlast us both. There is no comparison. You gave me life. Real life, not just survival. I will never regret choosing you." She smiled, that same radiant smile that had first captured his heart, and leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Jonas Emmett. I have loved you since you covered me with furs and slept by the fire to keep me safe. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Olivia Emmett, my wife, my heart, the woman who found me when I was lost and gave me a reason to find my way back to the world." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the mountains, grateful for every moment they had been given, for every hardship they had overcome, for the love that had sustained them through it all. The mountain man, and the woman he had saved from the blizzard, two souls who had found each other in the wilderness, and built a legacy of love that would endure for generations. Their story would be told and retold by their descendants, passed down through the years as a testament to the power of love, courage, and second chances. The tale of how Jonas Emmett found Olivia Vale asleep in his bed after a 3-day blizzard, covered her with furs and slept by the fire to keep her safe, and how that single act of kindness had blossomed into a love story for the ages. And when Jonas finally closed his eyes for the last time at the age of 72, Olivia holding his hand and whispering words of love, he went peacefully, secure in the knowledge that his life had meant something, that he had been loved and had loved in return, that he had been granted redemption and grace far beyond anything he deserved, that his legacy would continue through his children and grandchildren, carrying forward the values he and Olivia had lived by. Olivia lived another 8 years after Jonas passed, surrounded by family, still telling stories of their early days together to anyone who would listen. She never remarried, never even considered it. Jonas Emmett had been the love of her life, her savior and partner, and no other man could ever fill that space. When she finally joined him in 1911 at the age of 76, it was with a smile on her face and his name on her lips. They were buried side by side in the Leadville Cemetery under matching headstones that bore simple inscriptions. For Jonas, Loving husband, father, and friend, he lived with honor. For Olivia, beloved wife, mother, and heart of our home, she lived with grace. But those who knew their story understood the deeper truth beneath those simple words. The cabin in the high mountains still stood for many years after, a silent witness to where it had all begun. Eventually it fell to ruin, reclaimed by the wilderness that had birthed it, but the memory of what happened there lived on. The story of two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, who had fought for their love and built a life that defied all odds, became part of the local legend, told around campfires and dinner tables for generations. Their descendants thrived, carrying forward the strength and courage of their remarkable ancestors. James Emmett's son became a state senator. Catherine's daughter became a teacher, educating children throughout rural Colorado. The family tree grew and branched, spreading across the state and beyond, but they all knew the story of their origins. They all understood that everything they had came from a winter night in 1878, when a desperate woman stumbled into a mountain man's cabin and found not just shelter, but salvation and love. The Colorado mountains stood eternal witness to it all, indifferent to human drama and triumph alike. But for Jonas and Olivia Emmett, those mountains had been the setting for the greatest adventure of their lives, the place where loneliness ended and love began, where two broken people had found each other and become whole. And so their story ended not with tragedy or separation, but with the simple, profound happiness of a life well lived together. A mountain man who learned that strength came not from isolation, but from connection. A woman who discovered that courage meant fighting for what you wanted rather than accepting what others deemed you deserved. And a love that began with an act of compassion during a 3-day blizzard and lasted until death and beyond. A testament to the transformative power of two hearts that refused to give up on each other or themselves. The end came peacefully for both of them, surrounded by the family they had created, secure in the knowledge that their love story would endure long after they were gone. And in the hearts of everyone who heard their tale, the lesson remained clear. Sometimes salvation comes when you least expect it, in the most unlikely of forms, and the bravest thing you can do is open your heart and let it in. Jonas and Olivia Emmett's love story became legend, but more than that, it became hope. Hope that even the most lost can be found, that even the most desperate circumstances can lead to joy. That love, real love, can heal old wounds and create new possibilities. That a single act of kindness, a mountain man covering a freezing stranger with furs and sleeping by the fire to keep her safe, can change the entire trajectory of two lives and create a legacy that spans generations. Their story was complete, their ending happy and satisfying, every thread woven together into a tapestry of love that would never truly fade. The mountain man and his bride, forever united, forever remembered, forever proof that even in the harshest wilderness, love could not just survive but flourish beyond all imagining.